One might argue that if Rena had never been handed the tray, she would never have asked the Alpha King to dance. But then again, if said king had not spent the entire evening looking directly at her, she would never have found the nerve. So really, the whole thing was his fault. All of it. She had been told to be invisible, and Rena Ashe had every intention of obeying. She had spent a year becoming an expert in it, the way other people become experts in horses or law, and she had come to the winter ball with a tray of glazed pears and a plan to carry it from one end of the great hall to the other without a single soul remembering she had been there at all. The plan lasted until she saw Doran Vale. He was under the eastern arch with a cup in his hand, laughing, and on his arm was a small bright woman in green, who had been standing in the second row of the bonding hall on the day Doran Vale looked at Rena across the flagstones and said in a voice that carried to the rafters that he would not have her. Not that he could not, that he would not. A rejection is a small thing in the strictest sense. It takes 4 words. But an omega, who is rejected at the altar, is understood in Veldrin to be spent. The bond is burned out at the root, and no second bond will ever take. It is not a law, it is worse than a law. It is a thing that everybody simply knows, the way they know that ice is cold, and it does not need enforcing, because nobody has ever thought to argue with it. Her father had been a lord of the second rank and a poor manager of money, and he had died the winter before the bonding, and the house had gone with him. Doran Vale was the last thing she had. When he refused her, there was no name behind her, and no roof over her, and it was Elizabeth Crane who put her in the archive and gave her a bed above it. Rena had been grateful, and stayed quiet, and made herself so small and so useful, that on most days she managed not to think about the flagstones at all. Tonight the hall was full of candles and fiddles and the wet green smell of forced hyacinth, and the court was drinking, and Rena carried her tray past a knot of young lords near the fountain and heard one of them say her name. She did not stop. She had learned not to stop, but she heard the rest anyway because her nose had always been better than it had any right to be, and the young lord had not troubled to lower his voice. He said it was in poor taste to have the Ashe girls serving pears at a ball. He said a thing like that ought to be kept somewhere it could not be looked at. And then he said the little word, spent, and the others laughed. Rena kept walking. Her hands were perfectly steady. She would remember that afterward, and never be able to explain it. Her hands were steady, and her face was calm, and inside her, something that had been holding a great deal of weight for a very long time, simply put the weight down. She reached the end of the hall and set the tray on a side table, beside a bowl of winter roses, and straightened her apron with 2 hands, the way one does before an inspection, and then she turned around and walked out onto the floor. The floor of Hallowmere is white stone laid in a spiral, and it is the widest floor in the realm, and to cross it you must pass under the eyes of the whole court, whether you like it or not. Rena had crossed it 400 times with a tray in her hands, and had never once been seen doing it. She was seen now. She felt it happen behind her, the way a field turns when the wind changes. The nearest conversations died first, then the ones behind those. A fiddler faltered, recovered, thought better of the whole business, and the music came apart in the middle of a reel and stopped. She did not look at any of them. She looked at the dais. King Sorin of Veldrin stood at the foot of the dais steps, with a cup he had not touched, and he had been watching her for the better part of an hour. She had told herself she was imagining it, because that is what a sensible woman tells herself. And she had gone on telling herself so right up until the moment she put the tray down. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, and he was, in the plain, unhelpful way of things, beautiful. He had been king since he was 19 years old, and he had a smile that arrived a half-beat before anyone said anything funny, and he was wearing it now. Rena stopped in front of him. 600 people, and she could hear the candles. So she looked up at the Alpha King, and she heard her own voice come out of her, and it did not shake. She asked him if she might have this dance. There is a particular silence that only happens in rooms with very high ceilings. It has weight, it presses down. Rena stood in it with her chin up, and watched the king's eyebrows lift, and watched him tilt his head, and watched something move across his face that she was in no condition to read. And then her blood came up. It roared. It filled her ears the way surf fills a cave, hot and total, and the world went far away and edged in white. She saw his mouth open, she saw his lips shape a word, and then another. She could not hear a single one of them, but she saw the room. She saw 600 faces change at once. She saw a duchess put her hand to her throat, and Doran Vale's cup stop halfway to his mouth, and a serving boy drop a jug. And at the edge of it all, she saw Elizabeth Crane standing very still by the western door with an expression Rena had never seen on her before. Whatever the king had said, it had gone through that room like a blade through silk. And Rena Ashe, standing in the middle of the widest floor in Veldren with her apron still tied at her waist, had not heard one word of it. Nobody would tell her. She had been walked off the floor by 2 of the household guard, not roughly, which frightened her more than roughness would have, and put in the small room where they kept the spare candles, and for 1 hour and then another, she sat on a crate, with her hands folded and waited to find out what she was. She went over it and got nothing. The king's mouth opening, the shape of the first word, her own blood, drowning it. 600 people knew what had happened to her, and 1 woman did not, and that woman was the only one it had happened to. When the door opened, it was Odalie Finch, and behind her Bram Teller, and both of them had the look of people arriving at a graveside. "You are alive," Odalie said. "Am I?" "You are alive," Odalie said again, more firmly, as though saying it twice made it a fact she could rely on, and sat down heavily on the crate beside her. Bram stayed in the doorway, a big, slow, kind man from the stables, turning his cap in his hands like a wheel. "What did he say?" Rena said. They looked at each other. She saw them do it. And something in her stomach went down a long way. "You do not know," Odalie said. "I could not hear. My ears went." "Odalie, what did he say?" And here was the thing that would keep her awake for a week. Odalie opened her mouth to answer, and closed it, and said carefully that from the north pillar it had sounded like one thing, and Bram said from the doorway that from the door it had sounded like something else entirely. And when Rena asked what the 2 things were, neither would say, not out of cruelty, because they were frightened, and neither trusted their own ears, and because whatever it was had been strange enough that 2 people, standing 40 feet apart in the same room, had walked away with 2 different stories. "There was noise," Bram said miserably. "After. There was a great deal of noise." "What kind of noise?" Bram looked at the ceiling. "The kind," he said, "that a room makes when it does not know what to do." Rena put her face in her hands. She had done this. Not Doran Vale, not the Lords by the fountain, not the year of being a lesson. She had crossed that floor on her own 2 legs and opened her own mouth, and whatever came next was hers. It was not a long list. The archive which she would lose, the small dry room above it, which she would lose. And Elizabeth Crane, who had given her both, and who had given her the only thing that kept her standing after the bonding hall, which was a use. That was Crane's word. She had used it on the night she came back for her, when the court had emptied and the candles had guttered, and Rena was still kneeling on the flagstones in a white dress like a woman waiting for a coach that was never coming. Crane had knelt on the cold stone in a good gown, and taken Rena's chin in her hand, and said that the world had decided Rena was worth nothing, and that the world was a stupid animal, and that she, Elizabeth Crane, had a use for her. Rena had followed her out of that hall, and had followed her ever since. The door opened again. Crane stood in it. A tall, spare woman, past 50, with iron-gray hair pinned so tightly, it looked painful, the keys of the household on a ring at her belt. In 30 years, nobody at Hollowmere had heard her raise her voice. She looked at Odalie. She looked at Bram. Neither needed telling twice, and the door closed behind them. "Well," Crane said, "I know." "Do you?" Rena stood up, Because you did not sit while Crane was standing. I know what I did. You do not, Crane said, and said it gently, which was somehow worse than shouting. She crossed the little room and put her hand on Rena's cheek, and her palm was cool and dry. And Rena felt her own eyes fill, appallingly, instantly, the way they had not filled in the great hall or in the 2 hours after it. You think you humiliated yourself, child? I would give a great deal for it to be only that. Then tell me what he said. Crane's hand stayed where it was. He said a great many things, she said at last, and he said them in front of the northern envoy, and half the council, and every noble house that has ever wanted to see this crown embarrassed. That is what you did tonight. You gave them a stick, and you put it in their hands, and then you went and stood where they could reach you. I did not mean to. No, Crane agreed. You never do. She took her hand back and said, in her ordinary voice, that Rena was to speak to nobody, and go to the archive and stay there, and that Crane would fix this, as she had fixed everything else. And Rena, who was 24 years old, and who had crossed the widest floor in Veldrin, on her own 2 legs not 3 hours ago, heard herself say, yes. That was when the bell went. It was the great bell above the gate, and it rang twice, which is the ring for an arrival, and Crane's head came up like a hound's. That is not an hour for arrivals, she said. She went to the door. Rena went after her, and they stood together in the passage and listened. And under the second stroke of the bell they heard it come up through the floor, not the tramp of a detail sent to make an arrest, not the heavy hurry of the watch. Footsteps, one set, unhurried, coming down the long passage from the state stair towards the archive. Nobody used that stair. It ran from the royal apartments and went nowhere else, and in a year of working below it, Rena had never once heard a boot on it. Beside her, Elizabeth Crane went absolutely still, and Rena watched the same impossible thought reach her. In the same instant it reached Rena herself. He had not summoned her. He was coming to her. The archive of Hallowmere is a low room with a stone floor and 900 years of the household's paper in it, and it had never in its life held a king. It held one now. Rena felt him before she saw him, the way you feel a fire in a room you have not entered yet. The air pulled taut, something under her skin came to attention, and she put a hand on the sorting table without deciding to. Wesh. In the great hall he had been one shape among 600. Here, there was nothing to look at but him. King Sorin of Veldrin stopped in the middle of the floor with his hands behind his back and looked around at the shelves with unhurried interest. Ah, he said, there she is. Elizabeth Crane went down into a curtsy, so deep and so fast that her keys chimed. Your Majesty, Mistress Crane. He did not look at her. He was looking at Rena. You have paper on your sleeve. She did have paper on her sleeve. She had been sorting the winter accounts when the summons to the ball came, and had never got the dust off. Your Majesty, Crane said, straightening. The girl is mine, and the fault is mine with her. What she did tonight, she did out of grief and not out of insolence. If there is discipline owed, let it be mine to give, and let it be quiet. The king listened with his head tilted, and Rena had the strange sense that he was not hearing the words so much as weighing them, checking them for seams. Quiet, he repeated. Yes, everybody does seem to want it quiet. He came forward and put one hand flat on the sorting table and smiled at Rena, and it was a perfectly friendly smile, and it did not reach anywhere near his eyes. Do you know? I do not think you heard me. No, Your Majesty, I did not. I thought not. You had the look of a woman listening to the sea. He straightened. Would you like to know what I said? Yes, say please. She stared at him. He waited, entirely at his leisure. Please, Rena said. I said granted and witnessed. The words meant nothing for perhaps 2 heartbeats. Then they arrived all at once, the way a stone arrives at the bottom of a well, and Rena heard herself make a small sound she was not proud of. Granted and witnessed. She knew the formula. Anybody who had copied out the old household roles knew it, because it sat in the front of every one of them like a dead insect pressed in a book. It was the answer of the crown to the right of the floor. Nobody had invoked it in 200 years. The right was older than the palace. Any wolf of Veldrin, of any house or of none, might cross the floor of the great hall and claim a dance of the king, and in the claiming of it claim a hearing. Not a favor, not mercy. A hearing granted and witnessed, with the crown bound to answer whatever was put to it. I did not, Rena said. Her voice came out thin. Your Majesty, I did not claim the right. I did not claim anything. I only asked you to dance. Yes, said the king pleasantly. I know. The archive was extremely quiet. Then why, Rena said, did you say you were granting it? Because you crossed the floor of the great hall and asked the king for a dance, he said, in the old form, word for word, whether you knew it or not. And a king who lets that happen and then says no has just told 600 people that the old rights are dead and that he killed them. He spread his hands. Whereas a king who says granted and witnessed is only a king with excellent manners. Behind her, Crane said, Your Majesty, forgive me. You cannot mean to seat this girl at a hearing, can I not? He beamed at her. Mistress Crane, the whole realm watched me grant it. The northern envoy watched me grant it. I should look extremely foolish taking it back before breakfast. She is an archive clerk. She is a wolf of Veldrin, the king said, and for exactly 1 second, the smile was not there. Then it came back, and he was pulling on his gloves. The right is claimed and granted and witnessed. She will have her dance. She will have her hearing, and she will have, he added over his shoulder, better lodging than a room above a paper store, because it will look like a slight otherwise, and I am told I have enough enemies. He was at the door. Your Majesty, Rena said. He stopped. She should not have spoken. She had crossed a floor to end a year of silence, and it seemed that the ending of it was going to be worse than the year. You are lying, she said. Elizabeth Crane made a sound like a woman being struck. The king turned around. There was nothing on his face at all, and Rena understood with perfect clarity that she had no idea what this man was. Say that again, he said mildly. You are lying, Your Majesty. Her heart was going so hard she could feel it in her teeth. I do not know the old form. Nobody in that hall knew the old form, because if they had, they would not have looked at me the way they did. You could have said no. You could have said nothing at all and had me walked out, and by morning it would have been a joke, and jokes die. Instead, you reached into a book 900 years old and pulled out the one thing that means nobody in this palace can touch me. She had run out of air. You saved my life, she said, in front of the whole court, and I would like to know why. And then King Sorin of Veldrin smiled, and this time it did reach his eyes, and Rena liked it a great deal less. Well, he said, there it is. There, what is? I have been standing in this room for 4 minutes, he said, and the mistress of the household has told me 3 lies, and the archive clerk has told me none. He pulled his second glove on. Your dance is on the 7th night. Wear something without paper on it. And he was gone. And the door closed. And Rena stood in the archive with her hands still on the sorting table, and did not dare, for a long time, to turn around and look at the woman standing behind her. They gave her a gown the color of wet slate, and a room with a window that faced east, and for 6 days Rena Ash sat in it and waited to be a joke. A king does not reach 900 years into a book for an archive clerk out of kindness. He does it for sport. She had the whole evening assembled in her head already, and it ended with a laugh and a bow and the door. On the 7th night, they came for her, and they did not take her to the great hall. They took her up 2 flights and opened a door onto a small square room, with a fire in it and a long window black with night. No court, no music. A table with 2 glasses on it, and King Sorin of Veldrin standing at the window with his back to the door. Shut it, he said, without turning. The door shut. Rena stayed where she was. There is no one here, she said. There is meant to be a hearing. A hearing is witnessed. That is the only thing in the right that matters. Her voice was climbing and she could not get hold of it. And you have put me in a room with a fire and a bottle and no witnesses at all. I want to know what you think is going to happen in here. He turned around. Nothing, he said, is going to happen in here. Then why am I in it? Because a hearing in the Great Hall would have you dead inside a month. He said it pleasantly, the way a man tells you the road is out. Half the houses in that room have spent 10 years waiting for a wolf, with no house and no protection to stand up in public and be useful to them. You would have been useful for about an hour, and then an accident on a staircase. He came away from the window. You will have your witnesses on a night I choose, when I know which of them I can trust, in a room with you. Until then, you will have this. Do sit down. Rena did not sit down. You are enjoying this, she said, enormously. Her voice went flat and hard, and she did not stop it. I am the woman. The whole of Hallowmere agreed to look through. I have carried trays past men who used to bow to my father, and not one of them has said my name out loud. Then I did a stupid thing on a dance floor, and instead of ending it, you have made me the most looked-at woman in this palace. And you will not tell me why. She let herself shake. So, if this is a game, have the decency to say so. A king who plays with a ruined woman is worse than one who hangs her. The fire spat. King Soren studied her, and the smile went off his face by degrees, like light going out of a room, and what was left underneath was not what she had expected. It was tired. You are right, he said, almost entirely. He pulled out a chair. Not for himself, for her. I have been playing since the moment you crossed that floor. Because playing is the only thing I know how to do in front of people. Sit down, Rena Ash. I am going to stop. She did not entirely decide to. He took the chair opposite and laced his fingers on the table, and there was nothing performing about it, and it was much harder to bear. I shall tell you a true thing, and it will not be flattering. I did not save you, because I could not bear to see you humiliated. I have watched a great many people humiliated in that hall and smiled through most of it. I saved you because when you stopped in front of me, you were not frightened. In 9 years, I have not met one person in this palace who was not frightened of me, and every last one of them lies to me as a consequence. That is not a reason, it is the beginning of one. All day I ask questions, and I am told the answer a man thinks a king would like. I could walk out of this palace tomorrow and find half of it invented, and I would have no way of knowing, because not one person in Hallowmere owes me the truth. He looked up. You told me. I was lying in my own archive. With your hands full of dust, I was not being brave, I was being stupid. Yes, he agreed. Do it again. Rena stared at him. You see, everything in this house, he said. Everybody has looked straight through you for a year, and a woman who is looked through learns a great deal. You know who is drinking. You know whose accounts do not sit right. You know which doors are locked that ought not to be. He tilted his head. And you have a nose on you. Do not trouble to deny it. I watched you find the lords by the fountain across 60 feet of hyacinth and roast pork. Heat went up her throat. That is not a gift. It is a nuisance. It is the most useful thing in this building. He set the glass down. So, here is my offer. Teach me my own house. Walk me through it the way you see it, and go on telling me the truth, even when I would very much rather you did not. A pause. Nobody sees you. I am asking you to see for me. The fire cracked. Rena sat very still. He had asked her for something. Not for service, not for use. He had leaned across a table and asked a spent omega to tell him the truth, as though her answer mattered, and nobody had asked her for anything since she was 23 years old. Why should I? She said. It came out almost soft. Because you crossed the floor, Soren said. You have done the hard part. You may as well finish. Rena looked at her own hands on the table. All right, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Relief, so plain and so unguarded, that she felt as though she had walked in on a man half-dressed. Then it was gone, and he sat back easy again, reaching for the bottle after all. "Good," he said. "Then we shall begin with something simple." He filled her glass and did not fill his own. And Rena would think about that afterward for a long time. "Mistress Crane holds the keys of the household." "She does." Rena paused with the glass halfway up. It was a perfectly ordinary question. It was the kind of question a man asks about a house he is only half interested in. And she looked across the table at the King of all Veldrin, at his easy face and his open hands and his untouched glass, and she felt the whole warm room go quietly, silently cold. He had not asked her about the watch. He had not asked about the stores, or the North Road, or the houses that wanted him dead. He had asked her about the keys. She did not answer him that night. She said she did not know, which was a lie, and he let her have it, which told her more than the question had, but she went with him anyway, and could never afterwards explain it to herself. 3 days later, she was standing in the flower store at 6 in the morning, with the King of Veldrin beside her in a plain coat, showing him where the sacks were short. 40 in, she said. 33 on the floor. Count them yourself. I shall wait. He counted them, going down the row with one hand out, touching each sack, and when he reached the end, he stood there, with his hand still resting on the last one. 33, he said. Every month. Never 40, and the ledger says. The ledger says 40. She folded her arms. The ledger always says 40. The ledger is the most obedient thing in this palace. He laughed. It got out of him before he had decided to allow it, and she liked having caused it, and immediately disliked that she liked it. So it went. The salt cellar. The tallow store. The laundry at the hour when the laundry talks, where she made him stand behind a door and listen for 20 minutes without once interrupting. He wrote nothing down and forgot nothing, and when she told him something he did not like, he did not tell her she was mistaken. He said, "Show me." And she showed him, and he looked, and then he was quiet for a while. "You are angry," she said, on the 4th day, in the passage behind the kitchens. "Yes, with me." He stopped walking and looked at her as though she had spoken in another language. "Rena," he said. 9 years. I have sat at the head of a table and been told the stores were sound." He rubbed his hand over his mouth. "There is a woman in that laundry, with a cough that will kill her by spring, and she is working because the winter coal ration for the servants' hall was cut 2 years ago, and I signed the cut. I remember signing it. I remember being told it was a saving of no consequence." He started walking again. "No consequence. I have been robbed my whole reign, and what they took was not the coal." Rena said nothing, which she suspected was the right answer. He was different in the mornings. The smile did not come on properly until there were people to see it, and Rena Ashe, who had been perfectly safe for a year, began to feel the first faint crack running through the middle of that safety. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself firmly and often. On the 9th night, they were on the west stair. It was late. The palace was down to its night candles, and the west stair is a narrow turning stair of old stone that comes down out of the dark in a spiral with no landings in it. Rena was 2 steps below him and talking. She was in the middle of a word when her nose stopped her dead. Steel, oil, and under it, faint and wrong and human, sweat. There is no reason for a man to be standing still in a stairwell at midnight. Standing still is the whole of it. A man walking down a stair leaves his scent smeared out behind him, thin as smoke. A man standing in a stair leaves it pooled, and it sits, and it thickens, and it says plainly, "I have been here a long time, and I did not want to be seen." "Down," Rena said. She did not decide to grab him. Her hand went out and got a fistful of the king's coat, and she pulled with the whole weight of her, backwards and down, and they went into the wall together hard enough to knock the air out of her. Something came out of the dark above them. Something went past her face close enough that she felt the wind of it in her hair and struck the stone by her shoulder and did not stop, because the man behind it did not stop. She had never in her life held a weapon. What she had was a lamp in her left hand, and she swung it with everything she had, and it struck and shattered, and the stair went black. The man went backwards up the steps, off balance, swearing. Soren was shouting. Somewhere below, a door banged open and light came climbing up, and the man was gone into it and away. Then nothing. The smell of spilt oil and old stone, and the two of them sitting on the steps in the dark, and Rena's heart trying to come out of her chest. "Are you cut?" she said. Her voice was not working properly. "Let me look, Rena." He caught her wrists, gently. "I am... well." Feet on the stair below, guards with lanterns, and the captain of the night watch swearing in a low, steady stream, and above them the sound of a man being taken. Rena sat on the cold step and shook, and in the middle of the shaking, in the middle of the noise and the lanterns, some cold, clerkish part of her that never stopped working, turned and looked at the man beside her. He had let her pull him down. He had gone with the pull, instantly, without a word, the way a man goes when he has been pulled down before. He had not cried out. He had not once said, "What is it?" or "Who is there?" His breathing, now, was almost even. He was not surprised. He was angry, and he was cold, and he was already, she could see it, thinking about the morning. But he was not surprised, and there is no man alive who is not surprised the first time a blade comes at him out of the dark. "How many times?" Rena said. Soren did not answer. "How many times has this happened?" He put out a hand and pulled her to her feet and held on a moment longer than he needed to, and then let go, and turned to the captain and began giving orders in a voice she had never heard him use, quiet and precise and entirely without charm. He did not answer her at all. For the better part of 2 months, Rena Ashe tried to find out what the king was hiding. It was the only sensible response to a man who had a knife come out of the dark at him and did not so much as flinch. Somebody wanted Soren of Veldren dead, and he had known it long before she did, and had said nothing to anybody. She watched. She listened. She read the household rolls until her eyes bled and found nothing, which was itself a kind of finding, because a palace this size does not produce nothing. And she asked him. That was the part that went nowhere. She would put a plain question, and he would give her a joke. She would press, and he would flirt, and by the time she noticed, the conversation was 3 fields away and grazing, peacefully. She cornered him once about the man on the stair, who had died in a cell before anyone put a proper question to him. And Soren said that a great many people died of Halimir, and that she was extremely fetching when she was suspicious. She threw a ledger at him. He caught it. "You tell me nothing," she said, "and you tell it beautifully." He put the ledger down on the table between them and leaned on it, and for one moment there was something quite serious in his face. "There is one thing I am not going to talk to you about," he said. "And I am not going to talk to you about it because the day I do, you will not walk through this palace. The way you walk through it now, you will be careful. And careful is a smell, and in this house it is a smell that gets people killed." "That is not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It is the shape of one. It is the best I have." She should have gone on pushing. She did not, and that was the beginning of the trouble. Because the longer she watched him for danger, the more she found she was simply watching him. It came on her in pieces, and she could have named every one if anybody had been cruel enough to ask. The way he stood in a doorway with his shoulder against the frame and let her finish her sentence, when nobody had let her finish a sentence in a year. The morning he came down to the flower store, with 2 cups of black tea, and gave her the one that was not chipped. The fact that at some point he had begun to sit down when she was standing, so that she looked down at him and not up, and she had noticed it only in the 4th week, and had been unable to breathe properly for an hour. And the night she came round a shelf in the muniment room, with her arms full of paper, and found him closer than she expected, and neither of them moved. And the lamp was behind him and she could not see his eyes at all. "You have paper on your sleeve," he said. "I always have paper on my sleeve." "I know." He did not step back. "It is my favorite thing about you." She got out of that room somehow. She could not afterwards remember how. And she lay under the east window and stared at the ceiling until it went gray, and called herself every name she owned. Because this was the thing she could not get around, and it sat on her chest at 4 in the morning with its full weight. She was spent. A wolf, rejected at the altar, does not bond again. Everybody in Veldrin had known it since before Rena was born, and she had felt it happen. She had felt something go out of her on those flagstones, and it had never come back. She had reached for it 100 times in the year afterwards, the way your tongue goes to a broken tooth. And there had never been anything there. So what was this? There could not be a bond. Which meant that what she felt when Soren of Veldrin looked at her across a table was not fate, and not anything with a name that made it dignified. It was a lonely woman inventing a warmth to hold, because a man had finally spoken to her, and because she was so pathetically grateful for it that she had built a cathedral out of 2 cups of tea. That was what she was. Not a woman in love, a spent thing, sitting in the dark, making something up. She began to avoid him, badly. He noticed and did not say so, which was worse. And Elizabeth Crane watched all of it. Crane never scolded. She came into the archive on a wet afternoon with a bowl of broth, because Rena had missed 2 meals, and stood behind her chair and put both hands on her shoulders. "You have been walking behind the King of Veldrin for 8 weeks with your mouth open." Crane's hands were warm. Her voice was very gentle. "Child, look at me." Rena did not look at her. "I have loved exactly one thing in my life," Crane said. "And it is you, and so I shall be unkind because nobody else will be. He is charming to the horses. He is charming to the cook, who is 70, and to the northern envoy who would happily see him dead. It is not a feeling in him, it is a tool, and he uses it the way you would use a key." Her thumbs moved on Rena's shoulders. "And you are a wolf who cannot bond? When he has finished being interested in the flower stores he will stop, and you will still be here, and I will still be here, and I will not have you kneeling on those flagstones twice." Rena's eyes were burning. "I know what I am," she said. "Yes," Crane said, and bent and kissed the top of her head. "That is why I trust you." She left, the broth went cold, and Rena Ashe, who could not sleep and could not bear her own skull, went back to work. She pulled the household ledger for the previous spring, a fat gray thing she had copied half of herself, and opened it out of pure habit, at random, in the middle, and she stopped. Someone had cut a page out, not torn. Cut, neatly, close to the binding, with a good blade, and the stitching pressed flat afterwards, so that a person turning the pages quickly would never see it. Then she went to the shelf and checked the lock on the ledger press. It was not broken, it had not been forced, it had been opened, and there were exactly 2 keys to that press in the whole of Hallowmere. One of them was on the ring at Elizabeth Crane's belt. The other one was in Rena's own pocket. She did not sleep. She sat in the archive with the ledger open and the little cut ridge of paper under her thumb. And the more she went through it, the worse it got, because it was not only that page. Once she knew what to look for, the palace came apart in her hands. A supply return signed by a clerk who had been dead a month. A grain account that balanced perfectly, which is impossible. 4 quarterly payments to a carter in the lower city, and no cart, and no goods, and no name. And every one of those entries had passed through a book kept in a press with 2 keys. She sat with it until the gray came up in the window. Then she locked the press and went and found the king. He was in the muniment room. He had taken to working there in the early hours, because nobody in the court would look for a king in a room full of estate returns. He glanced up when she came in, and whatever was on her face made him stand. "Rena, tell me it is a scheme," she said. He went very still. "I beg your pardon. Tell me it is a scheme." Her voice was not steady, and she had stopped expecting it to be. "Tell me you want something from me. Tell me you needed a clerk who could not run to anybody, or a nose, or a witness, or a woman with no house who would be believed by nobody if she talked. Tell me any of it. I do not care what it is. Tell me a thing that makes sense. Because I cannot do this." The words came out of her like something being pulled. "For 2 months, you have been kind to me, and nobody is kind to me, and I have lain awake trying to turn it into arithmetic, and I cannot." Her breath caught. "Tell me it is a use. If it is a use, I understand it. I have been a use before, but if it is not, then I have been letting myself want something, and I am not built for that, and I would like my peace back." The muniment room was very quiet. Soren came round the end of the table. He did not hurry. "Rena Ashe," he said, "you are the most frightening woman in this kingdom. Do not." "I am not being charming." He stopped an arm's length from her. "There is nobody else in Veldrin who would stand in a locked room with the crown and say the word spent to its face. You terrify me. I lie awake as well." She could not look at him. "Do not say that unless it is true." "Then look at me and decide." She looked up. There was nothing on his face. No smile. No angle. He stood there and let her look, and it was the most defenseless thing she had ever seen a man do, and it went through her like a nail. "I want something from you. You are right about that. I have wanted a great many things from you for weeks, and I have not said so, because you are a wolf with no house and no protection, and I am the king, and there is no version of me asking that is not also me leaning on you." He put his hands behind his back, deliberately, like a man tying his own wrists. "So I am not going to ask. I am going to stand here, and you are going to send me away, and I will go, and never trouble you with it again, and tomorrow we shall go and count the salt. That is the whole of the offer." "That is not an offer." "No," he agreed. "It is a door. You may shut it." Rena thought about the flagstones, about a white dress, and a man who would not have her, about a year of carrying trays through rooms where nobody said her name, and the word spent, and how carefully she had built a life in which she would never again stand in the middle of a floor and ask for something. She had crossed the floor once. "Or," she said, "or, you could prove it." He did not move for a moment, and then he did. His hands came up and framed her face, and he kissed her, and every careful thing in Rena's head went white and quiet all at once. He was not careless, and he was not careful, he was certain. That undid her, the plain, unhurried certainty of a man who had made up his mind a long time ago and had only been waiting to be allowed, and then her nose caught up with the rest of her. She had been reading rooms for a year and had never once read this. It came off him in a wave, hot and dark and entirely without artifice, and it was not amusement, and it was not kindness. And it was certainly not charity, it was want. Plain, helpless, undignified want, aimed at Rena Ashe with paper on her sleeve, and it folded her resistance in half. Nobody had ever wanted her. Men had wanted her father's name. Doran Vale had wanted the match. Elobet Crane had wanted a use. She had never in her life stood in the path of a man's undisguised wanting, and been the only thing in it. And somewhere in it, she stopped being frightened, and the thing she had held shut for a year came open, and she let it. The lamp burned down, and nobody trimmed it. Afterwards in the dark, she lay with her cheek on his chest and thought, quite clearly, that she was going to pay for this, and did not care at all. He fell asleep before she did. It seemed an extraordinary thing for a man to do, to fall asleep in front of somebody. And she lay there and looked at his face and felt something in her chest turn over slowly, like a key. He said something. A mumble? A half word. The noise a sleeping man makes. She smiled and put her hand flat on his ribs. Then he said it again. And this time it came out whole. And Rena Ashe lay in the dark, with her hand on the King of Veldrin, and felt every drop of warmth go out of her body. He had said, Elizabeth. She told herself it meant nothing. A name in a sleeping mouth is not evidence. Crane was in the man's ledgers, and his accounts, and his walls. Of course, he said her name in his sleep. Rena lay awake until the birds started, and told herself so, perhaps 40 times, and it did not work once. She said nothing. That was what she was proudest of afterwards and most ashamed of. She said nothing to him and nothing to Crane, and went on as though the floor had not moved. The northern envoy came in on the last week of winter. Rask of the Hollow North was a broad gray man, with a beard like wire, and a habit of watching the room instead of the person he was speaking to. And he brought 300 riders, and a treaty Veldrin needed, more than it liked to admit. There was a state dinner, and a great deal of pretending, and Rena, who 2 months ago had carried a tray through that room, sat at the high table in dark green silk, with the whole court looking at her, and did not weep. Soren was magnificent. He made Rask laugh twice, and steered a table of hostile men through 2 hours of dangerous small talk without letting one of them get his footing, and never once stopped smiling. Rena watched him do it, and felt sick. Afterwards he took her out onto the north colonnade, where the music thinned and the air came cold off the gardens. "You hate this," she said. "Hate is a strong word. You are lying." He laughed, surprised before he could catch it. "I am, rather." He leaned on the balustrade, and the ease went out of him all at once, the way water goes out of a cracked jug. "There is a version of me in that room tonight, and he is a very good king, and I have never met him. I put him on in the morning like a coat, and I have worn him so long that I am no longer certain what is under it." Rena stood very still. "I am being maudlin," he said, and the smile came back on like a lamp. "Too much wine and not enough, Soren." He stopped. She reached up and put her hand against the side of his face, the way nobody would ever dare do to a king, and felt him go rigid, and felt the false smile come apart under her palm. "You are not nothing," she said. "I have been in the flower store with you at 6 in the morning. I have seen what is under it. And I like him a great deal." Something broke open behind his eyes. "Rena," he said, and it came out of him raw, and he kissed her. And the world moved. It was not the heat. She had learned the heat in the muniment room in the dark, and this was not that. This came in through the place where they touched, and it poured. And it was not hers. Relief, terror, a loneliness so old and so wide that she gasped under the weight of it, and under all of it, a wanting that had nothing to do with her body at all. It was his. She was standing inside another person. Rena tore herself backwards so hard she hit the pillar. Soren's eyes were black. His chest was going. "Did you?" he said. "Rena, did you feel?" Her heart was slamming so hard she thought the colonnade must hear it. Because it was not possible, she was spent. She had been weighed on those flagstones and found empty, and Elizabeth Crane had held her face in 2 hands and told her so with love. If Rena Ashe was standing here, feeling a bond, then either the whole of Veldrin was wrong, or she was doing what a lonely woman does, inventing it. Standing in front of the king of the realm, with her hand on his face like a beggar with her palm out, feeling something that was not there, she would rather have died. "It was a kiss," she heard herself say. Soren froze. "A kiss," he repeated. "That is all it was." Her voice came out flat, and hard, and horrible. "That is all it can be." She watched it land. She watched his face do something she would think about for the rest of her life, and then watched him put the mask back on, quickly, professionally, the way a man pulls a coat over a wound. "Of course," he said. "You are quite right. Probably nothing." And a servant came out onto the colonnade with a tray. Rena was looking at Soren, at the careful, terrible politeness of his face, and it was pure habit that turned her head. Pure habit, and a nose that had never learned to mind its own business. 2 cups of dark wine, and under the wine, thin and green and utterly wrong, something that had no business being in a cup at all. There was no time to shout. Soren's hand was already going out for the nearer cup, and Rena moved and hit it, and it went off the tray and burst on the flags in a black star. The servant did not run. A frightened servant runs. This one stood for 1 whole second and looked at her properly, the way you look at a problem, then set the tray down with great care and was gone into the crowd before Rena had drawn her next breath. The wine was going into the cracks between the stones. It was in both cups, she said. Soren. He was going to give one too. His hand closed on her wrist. You will tell no one. She stared at him. There is a foreign king 40 feet from us, he said, fast and low and absolutely cold, and 300 of his riders in my yard. If it gets out that a man was poisoned at my own table on the night of the signing, I shall have a war before the candles are out. His grip tightened. No one, Rena. You cannot. Not the watch. Not the captain. Something in his face changed and he said the next part very quietly. And not Mistress Crane. The night went silent. What? Rena said. You heard me. She raised me. I know. She keeps the keys. If somebody is bringing poison into this palace, she is the first person who ought to be told. She would tear the place apart. Rena! He let go of her wrist and stepped back, and said it as gently as it is possible to say such a thing. Especially not her, and he turned, and straightened his cuffs, and walked back into the light, with his smile already on, and left her in the dark with broken glass at her feet and wine spreading into the stone. She gave him a count of 30, then she followed. She kept to the edges the way she had kept to them for a year, and nobody looked at her, because that was the one thing this palace had always been reliably good at. She watched the king take Rask by the elbow, and say something that made the gray man snort into his beard, and smile at a duchess, and steer a room full of enemies, with a poisoner still loose in the building. And she watched him step through a side door and watched the smile fall off his face the instant it swung shut. Rena went after him. He went down. That was the first wrong thing. Not up towards his own apartments. Not out towards the yard. Down, 2 flights, and along the servants' passage, quickly and quietly, and without a lamp, like a man who had done it a great many times before. She followed him to the door of Elizabeth Crane's private rooms. He had a key. Rena stood in the black of the passage and watched the King of Veldrin put a key into the lock of the mistress of the household's door, and turn it, and go in. She did not remember crossing the passage. She remembered her hand on the latch, and the way the door gave. And then she was standing in the doorway of a room she had been in 100 times. Soren was behind Crane's writing desk. Every drawer of it was open. He had a sheaf of papers in one hand, and the household ledger for the previous spring in the other, open at the place where the page had been cut out. He looked up. Neither of them moved. Rena, he said. And here was the thing she would come back to for the rest of her life. He did not lie. She saw the lie arrive behind his eyes, and saw him look at it and put it down, and for a moment he simply stood there, with the evidence of a year in his hands, and let her look at him. Say something, she said. His jaw moved. An hour ago, she said, and her voice was not her own. A man tried to poison your cup, and you told me to say nothing and not to tell her, and then you came straight down here in the dark to go through her desk. The room was tilting. So say something, Soren. Something that is not a joke. He set the papers down. I have been investigating Elizabeth Crane, he said, for 20 months. The words did not resolve. They were sounds. She has been bleeding this household since before I was crowned, he said. The stores, the coal, the walls. Not for money. Money is what she takes, not what she is doing. She has been buying men, household men, guards. Carters in the lower city. He tapped the ledger. 4 attempts on my life in 2 years. 3 of those 4 men had been on this household's books within the 12-month. and every one of those entries went through a press with 2 keys. He looked at her, and she has one of them. Rena could not feel her hands. You are wrong, she said. I am not. She raised me. I know, he said, and it came out of him torn. Gods. Rena, I know. And then the last piece came, all on its own, very quietly, the way the worst things do. You needed somebody inside her house, Rena said. He did not answer. Somebody she trusted, with her keys and her books and her rooms. Who was not hers, whom nobody in Hallowmere would think to watch, because nobody in Hallowmere looks at me at all. Her breath was going wrong. You hunted for that person for 20 months and could not find her, because everybody in this palace belongs to somebody. And then a spent Omega walked out onto your floor in an apron and handed herself to you in front of 600 witnesses. He said nothing. Granted and witnessed, she said. Rena, that is the whole of it. That is why a king reached 900 years into a book for an archive clerk. Not because I was brave. She was not crying. She noted it with distant surprise. Because I had a key in my pocket and nobody in the world to run to. It is not the whole of it. Say I am wrong. He tried. She watched him fail. Rena put her hands over her face. She had been weighed once, on the flagstones, in a white dress, and found worth nothing. She had built a small gray life around that fact and had almost made it warm. And then a man had asked her to tell him the truth. And she had let herself believe she was wanted. And here was the number. Not nothing after all. 1 key. She was worth 1 key to 1 locked door, and she had handed it to him in a muniment room with the lamp burning down, and thought it was love. Not all of it, Soren said. He came round the desk. It began as that I will not pretend otherwise. But it stopped being. Why did you not tell me? He stopped. You watched me pull you down a staircase. You watched me put a lamp in a man's face. I stood in front of a cup of poison for you 2 hours ago, and you never once told me the truth. Why not me? And Soren of Veldren, who always had the answer before you had finished the question, stood in the wreck of another woman's desk and gave her the only honest thing he had. Because I did not think you would believe me, he said. Not about her. His voice was barely there. And I was right. Look at your own face, Rena. I am right. It hit her like a slap, because it was not wrong. Get out of my way, she said. Rena, there is a poisoner in this palace, and a foreign king downstairs, and I need— He caught himself. She saw him hear it. 1 second too late. I need you. She stood in the doorway and looked at him, and something in her closed like a door in winter. Yes, she said, you do, and she walked out. The passage was black and cold, and she got 10 paces down it before her legs stopped working, and she slid down the wall and pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes until she saw stars. Twice now. Twice in 2 years, she had stood in a room and let herself believe that somebody had chosen her. Rena, her head came up. Elizabeth Crane was standing in the passage, 10 paces away. Quite still, in the dark, as though she had been waiting a long time, and she opened her arms. She went to her. Of course, she went to her. She went the way a child goes, stumbling, and Elizabeth Crane took her in and put a hand on the back of her head, and Rena wept into a woman's shoulder, in a black passage, and hated herself for the comfort of it. He used me, she said. I know, child. I have known since the night he walked into your archive. I hoped to spare you it. She let Rena cry herself out. She had always been patient. And then, when it was done, Crane took her by both shoulders and looked at her with terrible sorrow and said that it was worse than Rena knew. There is a man dying in the north wing, she said. Rena stared. One of Rask's household. He took a cup at the table tonight that was not meant for him. Crane's mouth was a line. I was at the colonnade door. I saw the king put that cup on the tray with his own hand. Her fingers tightened. He means to kill the envoy, lay it at the door of the northern houses, and take the hollow north by war. And he has spent 2 months walking you round the flower stores, so that there would be an honest woman beside him to swear he was elsewhere. The passage was very cold. You saw him, Rena said. With my own eyes. What was in it? Crane did not hesitate. She had built the story too well, and polished it too bright, and she wanted it believed, and so she reached for the one detail that would make it real. You, she said. Crushed green you. You could smell it across the colonnade, and Rena Ashe stood in the dark and felt the world turn over on its axis with a click, because she had been on that colonnade. There had been nobody at the door. Nobody. She would have smelled a mouse, because Soren had never once left her side, because no man had died, and no cup had reached the table, and the wine had gone into the cracks between the flagstones where it was, at this very moment, drying. And because there were exactly 3 people in Veldren who knew what that wine had smelled like: the man who mixed it, the boy who carried it, and Rena, who had told nobody, not a soul, not O'Daly, not Bram, not the watch. She looked into the face of the woman who had raised her, then she let her mouth crumple and let her shoulders come down and said in a small, broken voice, "What do we do?" Crane's eyes went bright. "We go to Rask," she said. A king who would poison a guest under his own roof is not a king, he is a mad dog, and the houses will not stand for it. There are good names, ready to steady this realm when he falls. Her hand came up and stroked Rena's cheek. But it cannot come from me. I am a servant. They will say I am reaching. It must come from someone they will believe. From me. From the woman who claimed the right of the floor. Crane said softly. The whole court witnessed him grant it. The whole court will hear you use it. Rena held her eyes. Yes, she said. They will. The walk to the great hall was the longest of her life. She had nothing, and she did the arithmetic of it over and over as she went, with Elizabeth Crane's hand resting light and warm on her arm. No proof. A cut page, a cold guess, and a smell that only she could vouch for. One wrong word in that room, and there would be riders on the north road by dawn. The doors of the great hall stood open. The music had stopped. Rask of the Hollow North was on the dais with his captains, and the council was there, and the Duchess, who had put her hand to her throat, and Doran Vale white as chalk beside his bright wife, and 600 faces turning. And Soren, at the foot of the dais steps, exactly where he had stood on the night of the winter ball, with a cup he had not touched. He saw her, his whole face opened. Then he saw whose arm she was on, and it closed. Elizabeth Crane let go of her. "Go on," she murmured. So Rena Ashe walked out onto the widest floor in Veldren, for the second time in her life. She walked all the way to the middle of it, to the center of the white spiral, and stopped, and turned so that she was facing not the dais, but the room. "I claim the right of the floor," she said. The hall went absolutely silent. "It was granted to me on the night of the winter ball," she said, and she made her voice carry, in the old form, before this whole court. "And it was witnessed. It has never been heard. I am hearing it now." She looked up at the dais. "Your Majesty, the right binds the crown to answer whatever is put to it truthfully before witnesses. Is that so?" Soren's face was very white. "It is so," he said. "Then I have one question, and it is not for you." She turned. She looked across 60 feet of white stone at Elizabeth Crane, standing by the western door, with the keys of the household on her belt, and she said, in the clearest voice she had ever produced in her life, "Mistress Crane, how did you know it was you?" Crane did not move. "Nobody died tonight," Rena said. "To the room, to all of it. No cup reached this table. A poisoned wine was struck out of the king's hand on the north colonnade 1 hour ago. By me. It went on to the flags, and any man here may go and smell it for himself. 3 people in this realm knew what was in that cup. The man who mixed it, the boy who carried it. She let it hang, and me, and I have told nobody." A sound went through the hall like wind through wheat. "So I put it to you before the crown and this court. Rena's chin came up. How did you know it was you? And Elizabeth Crane, who in 30 years at Hallowmere had never once raised her voice, looked at the girl she had made and opened her mouth, and nothing came out of it at all. Search the press, Rena said, and did not take her eyes off Crane. The ledger press, in the archive. 2 keys. Search it now, while she is standing in the middle of this floor and cannot reach it. Then search her rooms. Then ask the household men on her books what they were paid for. This is grief, said Elizabeth Crane. The child does not know what she is saying. Then a search costs you nothing, said Rask of the Hollow North. And he did not look at Crane when he said it. And he nodded to 2 of his own men. And Elizabeth Crane's face changed. The grave, tired, honest woman went out of it. What was left was cornered, and it was fast, and it moved. She did not run for the door. She ran for the brazier, with papers out of her own sleeve, and she was 3 strides from the coals when Rena reached her. Rena simply put the whole weight of herself in the way of the woman who had raised her, and they went down together on the white stone. And Rena got both hands around the papers and would not let go, and Crane fought her for them, and then the guards had them both. They pulled the papers out from between them still whole. They took Elizabeth Crane out through the western door, with her arms behind her, and she did not struggle, and she did not weep, which was the most frightening thing she had ever done. But at the doors she stopped. She looked back across the widest floor in Veldrin, at the girl kneeling on it with her hair come loose and the papers still in her fists, and smiled at her almost tenderly. You are welcome, by the way, she said. For the flagstones, somebody had to pay him. Who do you imagine it was? And then she was gone, and the doors shut, and the whole hall was noise. Dorinvale did not last 4 minutes. He sat in a small stone room, with the king on one side of him and Rena Ashe on the other, and told the table that he had been 8,000 in debt, and that a woman had come to him a fortnight before the bonding and offered to clear it. He was not required to do anything. He was only required to say 4 words in front of the court. She said it was a kindness, he said to the table. She said the girl was in over her head and would thank us both later. And after, said Rena, what was she to do with me after? She said that a wolf with nowhere to go is the only kind you can trust. They brought her 3 physicians, from 3 different houses, and none of them consulted the others, and each told her the same thing in almost the same words. There was nothing wrong with her. There had never been anything wrong with her. A rejection at the altar sours nothing, burns nothing, spends nothing. It is a thing that everybody knows, and there is not one page in 900 years of the household rolls that says it is true. She had not been spent. She had been told she was on a stone floor by a woman who needed her to believe it. Rena went out into the yard and stood in the rain for a long time. Soren found her there. I love you, he said, and his voice was in pieces. I know how it began. I began it. But it stopped being that in the flower store, and on the stair, and in the muniment room, in the dark, and you know it stopped. You are the only person who ever asked me a question and wanted the actual answer. The rain came down. She looked at me for a year, Rena said, and she saw a use. Then you looked at me, and you saw a key. She turned around. Her face was wet, and she did not know how much of it was rain. And every word you are saying now, you are saying only because I opened the wrong door at the wrong moment. If I had not followed you down that passage, you would still be lying to me, kindly, and I would still be happy. Her voice broke, and she let it break. I cannot tell the difference anymore between being loved and being used well. Nobody ever taught me the difference, and I am not going to learn it from you. She left him standing in the rain. They made her keeper of the archive in the spring. She rebuilt the household books from the foundation up. She found 22 names drawing money out of Hallowmere and took every one out by the root. She put coal back in the servants' hall. The woman in the laundry with the cough did not die. She sat at the long table twice a week, with the council and the king, and said what she thought, and the room listened, and she went back to the archive afterwards and closed the door, and she was miserable. He courted her, and there was no dignity in it anywhere, and he did not appear to mind. He sent her estate returns, with questions written in the margins in his own hand, questions that were actually about the returns, which was somehow worse. He sent 100 weight of good coal to the archive, which was cold, and she had it sent on to the infirmary. He waited by the council chamber door and said, "Keeper, might I have a moment?" And she walked past him. For 5 months. And the bond sat under her ribs like a lit lamp in a shut room, and she kept the door on it, and it did not go out. "Keeper," said Odalie at last, "talk to the man." "I was used," Rena said, "by both of them. I am not queuing up for a third turn." And then in the 6th month, it stopped. No returns, no questions in the margin, no waiting by the door. He passed her in a long gallery and inclined his head and said, "Keeper," in a voice that was perfectly civil and not cold, never cold, and kept walking. "This is what you wanted," she told herself. And every night, the warm, patient thread under her ribs refused to fade, and she lay in the dark with her hand pressed flat over it and told herself that she had won. The knock came a week later. Odalie was in the doorway, the particular gray color of a person who has made a very large mistake. "He is gone." Rena was on her feet before she had decided to be. Not in his rooms, not the yard, not the council chamber, not the stables, nowhere. No horse taken, his sword is on its stand. Nobody has seen him since the 10th bell. The floor went a long way away. 4 attempts in 2 years, and 22 names struck out of the ledger, by Rena's own hand, and had she got them all? Was she certain? Was she absolutely? "Wake the trackers," she heard herself say. Quietly. No bells. They went. She stood in the archive with her hands flat on the sorting table, and her heart going like a hammer. There was one way left to find him. There had been one way left for 6 months. Rena pressed her hand over her own ribs, over the lit lamp in the shut room, over the thing she had been strangling since the night she had looked a man in the face and told him it was only a kiss. "It is duty," she told herself. It was not, and she knew it, and she opened the door. Anyway, it hit her like a shutter torn off in a gale. Sorrow first, deep and old, and so exactly the twin of the thing she had been carrying, that for a moment she could not tell whose was whose. Then a loneliness that took her breath. Then something she had not expected at all. And it was not fear, and it was not pain. It was nerve, frayed and battered and hopeless, but nerve. A man standing very still, trying to make himself do something. She went out of that archive at a dead run. The bond pulled her through the postern and down into the lower city, into the narrow streets, where the light of an autumn evening came down sideways and gold, and she followed it until she came out into a square she had never stood in before. There was a dance in it. The harvest dance, the common one, with fiddles on a cart and lanterns strung between the houses and a floor of beaten earth, and 200 people stamping and shouting, and not one of them knew who he was. He was standing at the edge of it, no crown, no guard, no coat worth stealing, just a tall man on the wrong side of the lantern light, with his hands at his sides, looking out across the beaten earth, at the dancing and not dancing. A woman selling nuts from a tray followed Rena's eyes and made a small sympathetic noise. "Oh, him," she said. "He has been standing there 3 nights running. Love, never says a word, never buys anything." She shook her head. "Never crosses," and Soren of Veldren turned his head and saw Rena Ashe standing in the mouth of the street. And he started to walk. He crossed the floor. He came out from the edge of the lantern light and walked into the middle of 200 strangers, and the dancers turned, because a man walking through a reel is a thing you notice, and the fiddles faltered and picked up, and faltered again, and gave it up altogether. He walked the whole way across it, and it took him a long time, and he did not hurry it. And he stopped in front of her, a tall man with no crown and no guard and nothing in his hands at all, in front of nut sellers and carters and laundry women and a fiddler on a cart. And he stood there with everybody looking, and Rena watched him find out what it costs. "I have been coming here 3 nights," he said. "I know," she told me. "I could not do it." His voice was not steady. 200 people, nobody who knows me. Nothing at stake at all, and I could not make myself walk out into the middle of it. I have stood at the side of that floor for 3 nights being sick with it. He swallowed. "And you did it in front of 600 people who had spent a year laughing at you. You did it in an apron. I wanted to know what it cost you. I could not think of any other way to find out." The square was silent. And King Sorin of Veldrin, on a floor of beaten earth, in front of strangers, with nothing to give her and no crown on his head, and no clever thing left in him at all, put out his hand. "May I have this dance?" Rena Ash looked at him for a very long time. She could feel him. She had left the door open. He was terrified, and he was hoping, and he was not performing, not one grain of it, and it poured through her so plain and so undefended that it was almost unbearable to stand in. "No," she said. He did not flinch. He simply went white and nodded and began to take his hand back. "Ask me tomorrow," Rena said. He stopped. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. "And the day after, and the day after that. Ask me when the fiddler has gone home, and there is nobody watching, and there is nothing in it for you at all. Ask me on a morning when you are tired and have not slept, and it would be very much easier not to." Her eyes were burning. "You are a man who has performed his whole life, so ask me, on all the days when it is not a performance, and I shall find out whether I can tell the difference, and so will you." The lantern swung. "And then," Sorin said. "And then," Rena said, "we shall see." He asked her the next morning in the archive, with paper on both their sleeves. He asked her in the flower store at 6 o'clock, counting sacks. He asked her on the west stair on the exact step which she thought was unfair, and told him so. He asked her at the council table, until Odalie Finch threatened to resign in writing. He asked badly, and beautifully, and once with so many flowers that the archive smelled like a funeral. He asked her every single day for 4 months. And on a perfectly ordinary morning, in the rain, in the yard, with nobody watching at all, Rena Ash looked at the man standing in front of her with his hair flat to his head and his hand out, and no crown on him anywhere, and she said yes. They were married in the great hall. The whole city came. They stood 6 deep along the walls, the laundry women and the carters, and the nut seller from the square, and they watched a king marry the archive clerk who had crossed the widest floor in Veldrin, in an apron, and asked him a question. He wept during the vows. She had known he would. She very nearly did not, and the bond gave her away entirely, and he laughed at her through his own tears, and she stopped caring who saw. "You are stuck with me now," he said, when it was done. "There is no taking it back." "Why on earth would I take it back?" said Rena. "I asked first."